I am Freeman Henderson.
So, Freeman, it's really good to have you here this evening and talk to you. And so, I haven't really got to know you better. So, I was kind of wondering about starting with your childhood a little bit tonight. What was kind of like your upbringing, or how were you raised, and if you wouldn't care to share a little bit about your childhood.
Sure. I was born in '64, the last of the baby boomers. My father worked in the coal yard at the power plant.
Okay.
Um, he was a man of few words. He lived by example a lot, and
Now, where
uh,
were you guys living at the time? Or,
actually, it was a real small house in Barlow that they rented
okay.
up towards the used to be a rest area, which has been since cleared. But they lived in a real small house, and my mom worked at Union Insulating in Parkersburg.
Okay.
Um, and my grandmother had a well, actually about 100-acre farm out Deming Road. It's just past the Barlow Cemetery, and we only lived there approximately 2 years, I think. And my both of my grandfathers were alcoholics.
Oh wow.
Um, I lost one as a baby, and then I lost one of them when I was real young. So I really never got to know them that much, and at least the one. But my grandma's brother, which would be my great uncle, never married. He was legally blind in one eye. He didn't drive. He lived with her. And there's a gentleman in Cutler, Kurt Singer, that would take him to Marietta Concrete. His whole career was there. But like I said, we lived in that little house for about approximately 2 years, and then mom and dad built a home on 30 acres on that particular
Oh,
farm of my
okay.
grandmother's. So we were, and at the time, that was the only house you could see from where dad built. And since then, it's built up quite a bit. But my great uncle really kind of became my grandfather. He took that place.
Oh, that's cool.
But yeah, I grew up, in the farm life. It instilled a good work ethic in me.
Yeah. So when you talk about farm life, like I'm assuming you had a lot of animals and
Yeah, Grandma had approximately 12 head of Hereford cattle plus the bull, and then of course they all calved every year, and then she had 60 head of sheep. So I can remember, at this time of the year, I just got flashbacks from it. The shears would come this time of the year every year and shear all the sheep. And Grandma would have a huge table with the spread. They'd come in at lunchtime and eat lunch. And
hmm
I passed the field recently this past week, and it kind of gave me memories of that.
yeah.
But
I'm kind of fascinated with you having sheep. I'm sure that's kind of gives you a unique perspective on scripture
and
with
it
that.
does, it
Yeah.
does. My, it's funny you mentioned that. Because we were at one point we were having it was one Sunday we were having a sermon on the sheep, and the pastor mentioned, about how dumb the sheep can be, and immediately my great uncle, he got offended.
Wait a second.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of funny, I kind of had to choke back the Snickers, but yeah, it was. I feel like I'm blessed,
Yeah.
to be raised where I was and with the family that God gave me. I really am.
Now, did you have brothers and sisters, or?
I had a sister that's 2 years younger than me, and then Caden and Kiera's mom is also my sister, and um, she was born when I was a freshman in college.
Oh wow!
So,
So much later.
yeah,
Big
much
age
later.
grade
Yeah, and
difference.
I would be carrying her around, and they actually thought it was my child. Dad was 46 at the time, and Mom was 41, and Dad was like in a daze for months after that. He was like,
Didn't know what to do. Huh?
yeah, he did, because, at that point, because Dad retired at 58, and so I'm sure, at that point in life, he's already thinking, okay, I've got it under control. I got 2 in college and I'm about through,
Yeah.
But God had other plans,
Yeah.
and, and I remember the day, actually, the day that it was announced. I tried to come home from college every weekend. I didn't. I tried to avoid those temptations and that lifestyle.
Yeah.
So
Where did you go to school?
I went to OU.
Okay.
It was close. They had a good school of engineering there, and I'd heard nightmares about kids riding buses around Ohio State to classes and all. And it's a beautiful campus. It really is, especially in the springtime with everything in bloom. But I happened to be home that weekend. My sister also. She's an RN. She went to OU Zanesville and got her RN. We were both home that weekend, and we rarely ate breakfast. Rarely. And
So you knew something was up if you were having breakfast.
Exactly. I'm smelling bacon cooking, so I go in the kitchen, and
trying to soften the blow.
yeah, yeah, and it didn't work so much for my sister. I was kind of elated,
Yeah, kind of excited.
Yeah, I was. I really was. And Mom was cooking, and we all sat down at the table. And before she got to the table, she was like, "Your dad has something to tell you, kids." And he's like, "No, I'm not going to tell him." And she said, "No, you are going to tell him." So he got kind of quiet, and he looked at both of us, and he goes, "Well, we're going to have another addition to the family, and it's not going to be another cat or dog." So, I was kind of elated. It's kind of, I don't know why, but it seemed like my sister kind of, it did something. I don't. It kind of changed her.
All right.
Yeah, but I was elated. Like I said, I would be carrying her around all the time, and everybody thought she was my child. But yeah. So I have a sister that's 2 years younger, and then one that's nearly 20 years younger.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I'm sure that was a surprise and a shock to your mom and dad.
oh yeah, and especially at that age,
Yeah.
and it's
And she turned out okay, right? Health
yeah,
wise.
and that was a big that was a big concern at the time. I think Mom actually denied all those tests, and every time anybody would approach her or ask, "Are you going to have the baby?" That was like totally out of the question.
Yeah.
But they, the Mom and Dad kept us in church our entire life. We attended the Methodist Church in Barlow, which
Okay.
is it's I know it's over 100 years old. Most of the entirety that I grew up there, we had an outhouse.
Yeah.
All wooden pews and hardwood floors. But and they we didn't live extravagant. I mean, we didn't have a lot, but I mean, God always provided for us. Our vacations consisted of like quality family time. I mean, it would either be camping in the woods on the property, or we may go for the weekend to Columbus to like relatives, and we would stay at a hotel, swim all day. But
Sounds like your mom and dad made family a priority
they
then.
were, they did. I mean, that was their utmost priority. I went uh, clear through Boy Scouts, and Dad participated. Mom, participated with my sister Julie in Girl Scouts. She was one of the leaders.
Okay.
At times they would be camping, and we would be camping half a mile away just to,
Be
to make sure everything's safe. And,
yeah.
But yeah, it was a very family oriented atmosphere. I was I felt love in our household at all times.
Good.
And my grandma was the same way. She, I've seen my grandma, pray in church all through my life, and she taught Sunday school, and she was one of those individuals that would, when you walked into the room, the world would stop.
Yeah.
It's like, sit down. How was your day? How's this going? How's that going? Um, there's no doubt in my mind that my grandmother, prayed for me daily.
That's awesome.
There's times I think, I probably wouldn't be here at this point if it wasn't for my grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way I think is those prayers, they matter. And
They do.
God honors those prayers. And
There's
so
there's power in prayer. There is.
it's
And,
neat that you recognize that and you saw that in her.
Yeah,
That she was very faithful to that.
yeah, she's definitely a big stone in the foundation. She
Now,
and
is that grandma on your mom's side?
I'm sorry, my
Okay.
mother's side.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure.
My grandmother, yeah, on my father's side was a really good woman too. She's a pretty woman. But she passed with a brain tumor.
Oh, wow.
When that first year as a baby, she passed, and my grandfather on my mom's side both passed. So I didn't get to know them at all.
Yeah.
At all.
That's probably too why you're, and both your parents had experiences with alcoholism. I'm sure that they made that priority to make sure you guys had a good, stable environment. That was
Exactly.
important for both of them
Exactly.
to provide that for you guys.
And yeah, and I mean, to just give you more insight to my dad's character, he served in the Air Force for 4 years in New Mexico, and he had 3 sisters at home that Grandma was raising, and he sent every paycheck home to raise us.
Really? Oh, wow. That is tremendous.
Yeah, and my entire family was like that. I mean, they would give you the shirt off their back. But yeah, he was a good man.
So I'm sorry to hear that. Did your father passed away? Or?
Yeah, and it was kind of a bad situation. He actually, Dad lived until he was 81, and he was really self-sufficient. I mean, he did his own laundry. He drove everywhere. Because of his back and some things, I would go out. He had a 2-acre yard. I would go out and mow his yard and try to help him keep things up. but he had a really, really bad hiatal hernia. And his family doctor uh, talked him out of it for years, but I think he had just got to the point where he didn't want to live with it anymore,
Sure.
you know. And I went to the consultations with him a couple of times. The doctor wasn't there, but his aide was there, and he went in for the surgery. And about 2 days after the surgery, um, his blood pressure plummeted right there in the room. All the people came in and they rushed him back into surgery. And what had happened was where they had repaired the hernia, it had tore. So, you know, everything in his stomach and stuff, it got inside of his chest cavity.
Oh wow.
So
Yeah,
it
that's not.
went fast. I
Yeah.
mean, Dan went downhill fast after that. He got sepsis inside his whole chest cavity. I mean, you know, they started out with a couple chest tubes, and then it went to like 1 inch chest tubes to try to drain out the infection. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
he ended up on a ventilator, and I pretty much lived in the hospital for a couple weeks. And it got to the point. I forget what department it really is, but one of the lady nurses came in and pulled me out and gave me, you know, the real story and what to expect. And you know, it got to the point where we had to make a decision. Uh,
I'm sorry. I'm sure that
but
was a tough.
it was tough, but I'm thankful for him, and you know, I just pray every day that, you know, when I'm gone, that I'm half the man he was.
Yeah. If you could just, think of a few words that you would say about him, what would be some like two or three words that sum up your dad's? And I know that may be hard, but
My dad, extremely hardworking. I couldn't have asked for a better provider, and he was sacrificial every day. Um,
well, that's
but
cool.
he, you know, and he was all. I mean, just his example was an encouragement to me. You know,
Sounds like
I
he was very consistent in his
he
behavior.
was,
You
he
could
was,
depend on him. You know,
he was
it
very
wasn't like
predict.
he was going to do something different the next day. You had that consistency of knowing who he
Exactly,
was, and what he did, and what he was about.
and yeah, and my mother was the same way.
That's awesome.
Uh,
Now, is your mom still living? Or?
no, I went through a really, really rough period. Um, at the time, I was working for Walker Systems in Williamstown. It's it's Hino now, where that truck plant is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we got bought out a couple of times. The last time was by an investor, and they shut that plant down. And you know, I briefly tried to get a job, but and they actually, you know, took a few couples up to West Hartford, Connecticut, to the corporate headquarters. You know, they tried to entice me to move up there, and so I ended up signing a contract to do 6 months in Mexico. They took the lower margin products, sent them to Mexico, and then the real high margin products, they sent those up to West Hartford. And so I had to do a stint in Mexico where I got the equipment started up and trained and tried to get that plant sustained for 6 months. And during that time, I was, some of my colleagues had got jobs. My boss had got a job. My boss happened to get one in New Philadelphia. It's on up 77. It's exit 83, I believe, up near Amish country. But he landed a job there. And then later on, I got an offer from another company in Caldwell. And I accepted the one in Caldwell. It was a 45-mile drive versus a 100-mile drive, and that's one way. And so my stint in crossing the border every day was about over. I had, in one way, it was a blessing. I got all these hotel points and frequent flyer miles, free tickets. I had, at the time, I had 3 kids. And we all went to Disney World for free. For the most part, the Disney
Yeah.
World tickets, but the hotel, the flights, all that was paid for. So we came back, and at that time, I found out that my mom had pancreatic cancer,
Oh.
and she was 63. And I found out in July, and I started working the job in Caldwell. I worked there 30 days, and I finally went to the president, and this is not my character, but I went to the president, and I'm like, I've got a lot of personal problems, and with the work you've given me, I can't keep my head in it. I've got to go somewhere else, and that was on a Friday. I mean, I didn't even give these guys any notice. I called New Philly, and I asked them if the job was still open there, and they said, yeah, whenever you want to start. I said, I'll be there Monday morning. And it was from my doorstep to the plant, it was 100 miles. So I started working up there, and the gentleman that I was telling you, he really was my grandfather. He was my great uncle, but he was my grandfather. At the time, he was in Arbors in Marietta. So after I started working for New Philly, we had found out about Mom in July, and by September, they both loved to go to Barlow Fair, and I had a double funeral on Barlow Fair weekend.
Wow.
I got the news about him before I left New Philly that night. I drove to Marietta. I got his belongings from Arbors, and he had passed away at 5. And then Mom passed away at home the next day at 8 in the morning.
Gee whiz.
And they both had paid lawyer drawn wills, and my uncle had left everything to Mom, and Mom had left everything to Dad. But since there wasn't 120 hours or 5 days differences in the deaths, they considered it simultaneous death, and both estates went into probate.
Really?
Yeah.
What a shame.
Yeah.
That seems like a crazy technicality there.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
But how painful that must have been. I mean, other than a car accident where,
right.
I mean, you wouldn't think that would be
right. And he technically,
related.
like you said, he died. He passed away the night before, and so I was made executor of his will, and Dad was made executor of Mom's will, and no matter what you're going through, I mean, God always has a plan. And So to make that even easier, the people I worked with some really good people in New Philly. They set my schedule to 4 days a week,
Wow.
and I got to stay home on Friday. So that allowed me to help Dad and help us to get through that process of the probate and
Yeah.
everything. Um,
It's almost interesting too that you mentioned about working at the other place that you felt like it was time for you to that you needed to let go of that job because you knew that you needed to change. It's almost like God was preparing you for what was to come, even though
yes,
you didn't fully understand why
right,
at the
right.
time.
And we've really got to trust him. We do. We had to have confidence and faith in it. And um,
So, how old was your dad when your mom passed away and your
oh,
grandpa?
he was devastated.
Yeah.
They were. My grandma had passed maybe 2 years before that,
Oh, wow.
and
So, it's
so
quite a bit of.
yeah, and mom had, my grandma had went through a lot of health problems, so she was on dialysis, twice a week, and mom always was the caretaker. She took care of her, and then, she took care of my great uncle, and so it's like, you know, dad and mom had reached their golden years, but they never got a chance to. It's like they sacrificed all their life.
Yeah. That
But
is one thing that's kind of hard to understand sometimes, but like you said, we even got to trust God with that because we understand that this life is just temporary.
exactly.
We have eternity in heaven. So whatever we think we lose here or sacrifice in this life, we got to understand that God recognizes that and sees that, and
Hmm.
that's going to carry over to eternity. So
Right, right. And there was, and this went on for I don't know. I mean, it just seemed like maybe a couple years. At the time, I had a house in Reno, and before Mom passed, she had asked me to if I would move to the farm and take care of Dad, uh, which they were almost adjacent to each other. He lived on 30 acres, and then adjacent to it was Grandma's farm with 70 acres. And like I said, I had three kids, and the oldest, he was a junior at Marietta. So, that entailed, and I was really worried about taking, him from Marietta to Warren, and plus the other two kids. And so, I had to sell the place in Reno, move out to the farm,
mm,
uproot him from Marietta, move him out there. Um, and I'm driving, 200 miles a day at the time. But God really does have a plan because it was, when Braden finished at Warren, I had seen the friendships he made there. He was like the new kid in town, so he loved it. He was one of those social
so he
butterflies.
kind of liked the
Yeah,
change. Oh, good.
yeah.
He
Now that
probably maybe it was a better fit for him. Or
Yeah,
yeah.
and it was, and I think that impacted his life. You know what I
Well,
mean?
good. Yeah.
And
Sometimes we worry a lot as parents, but if we just trust God on those
right
things.
now, the other two, they didn't adjust, and their mom was teaching at Marietta Middle School, so they started back at Marietta.
Oh,
But yeah, you take the top 10 most stressful things in life. I was checking them off. I lost a job, I quit a job, I started a job. I sold the house, I moved. It was really a rough time. And we've had a couple of years like that since then. But it makes it so much easier, you know, when you're convinced that God has a plan.
Yeah.
I had already been through a lot, and then years down the road, after marrying, I got married. We went through another period where we lost her dad. Um, I lost a granddaughter on her second birthday,
Oh wow.
and we lost my dad. And there was a couple more friends in there. Tracy's sister. We were really good friends with. She passed.
If it's all right, can I ask about your granddaughter? How did that happen?
Um, she was. That was my middle son. I had two boys and a girl. Michelle was born last. We had we had two boys, and we weren't gonna have any more kids. But she was conceived about a week before I went to the doctor, and if I had to do it all over again, I'd do the same thing.
Yeah.
But my
So she was a surprise.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But my middle son, he had Reagan, and she was around 2 years old at the time. And then when Veda was born, they life flighted her to Columbus and determined that she had wolf Hirschhorns.
What's that?
It's a
Okay.
genetic thing. It's like 1 in 50,000, I think.
Wow.
And
So she had complications from that, or
yes,
okay.
and she passed on her second birthday, but she was a real blessing.
Yeah.
God gave her to us for 2 years, and
I'm
she was
sorry.
she was really special.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But yeah, we go through a lot of trials, but like you said, um, this is not home.
Yeah.
Just like your last sermon, this is not our home. And I
See, I didn't know that you'd dealt with so many deaths in your life and
yeah
people that were specialties, people that, and to have, you know, I mean, of course, I've had the surprise of my mom's
mm,
passing,
yeah
but I never had the experience of two people passing that were special so close together. And I'm sure that was hard. And of course, having a granddaughter that you build
yeah
a special bond with, and I'm sure that was devastating news for you, for the family to hear. But I think that's what's so. I mean, from what I gather, seeing her was even a blessing because
oh yeah
she was almost like an angel, huh?
she was. And she has a perfect body now.
Yeah. Well, if I can, I want to talk about the time you accepted Christ, but before that, I just think it's really be good for you to share what's helped you, through the valleys, because I know there's valleys beyond just the life and death type things, but what's helped you to kind of stay focused and to keep, how do you keep looking to the Lord when you face those valleys of challenges?
Um, God has surrounded me with a lot of good people, a lot of good people, and then you know I've had a lot of hardships, but there's also mountaintops. It's and normally when you're there, it's kind of like this is a calm before the storm because something's coming. But there was one instance in between all this. Um, there was one day I was having car problems, At the time, I owned a old '64 pickup that I had brought back from North Carolina, and we only had it in a family car. So our means of transportation was down, and I borrowed Dad's car, so my wife can get around and run. That day, I was running down to the parts store in Marietta, and I go into. I can't even remember what it was. I go in to get the part I need, and as I'm walking in, I see this older lady, kind of homely looking, and she's bent down in the car working, and so I run in there, I grab my part, and I'm in a hurry to get back out there and get back home, and so I'm flying out the door. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her still struggling, and I get to the truck, and as soon as I grab the door handle, I could almost hear it audibly, like he's right behind me, and it's like your problems aren't that big. Um,
Kind of like a still small voice, but
yeah,
it was kind of
a little bit louder. I mean, it was
God was getting your attention. Huh?
It was yeah. It was loud enough to the point that I opened the door. I threw the keys and the parts across the seat of the truck, slammed the door, and I'm marching back up there, right? And
Sounds like kind of a little resistant. You know what you're supposed to do, but you're like, why, God, why are you asking me to do
yeah,
this right now?
it's embarrassing. You got a 40-year-old here borrowing Dad's car, and
Yeah,
But I mean, I've really been I've really been blessed. I mean, none of I haven't done anything. It's just the talents that God gives me. We're nothing without Him. So I've always done my own maintenance. I've been fortunate. I don't have to pay the $100 an hour. But so I marched back up there, and I'm hollering before I even get to the lady. I'm like, "Ma'am, you need any help?" And she looks up at me, drops the tools, and walks straight to me, and she goes, "Son, you don't know it, but God said, but God said." And then at this point, I'm speechless. I don't have words now.
yeah.
I'm dumbfounded. So.
What's cool is God spoke to you. You listened to that, and she confirmed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I go over there. She's trying to put on this alternator belt, and she's like, I'm traveling through. The alternator went out. She goes, I just spent my last dime filling up the tank and buying this alternator, and I can't get the belt back on. And so I grab the tools and I start to get the belt on and everything, and just out of the corner of my eye, I kind of see. It seems like a younger figure dressed in white, which it really didn't. It really didn't faze me because I grew up in the '70s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People wore white painters pants, white T-shirts, and everything. And it's like I look down and I look back up within it seemed like a fraction of a second, and they're gone. So I laid the tools down, and I even walked to the corner of the building and looked down the building to see if they went around the building.
Yeah.
So I go back. I go back, and I get the belt on, and she tries to start the car. Of course, it won't start. I'm thinking, okay, the alternator went out. There ain't much left in the battery, right? And so I said, ma'am, I'll be right back. And I run in there, and I grab a can of starting fluid, and I come back out, and I said, just bump it, don't try to start it. And so I sprayed it in there, and the ether, and she bumps it, and it tries to run, right? And it's this older um, Thunderbird, completely rusted out, And this woman had just drove from Charleston, and she's going to Ironton or something like that. And
Wow.
as I'm working on the car, she's telling me, she's uh, just got a clean report from cancer, and she went down there for some kind of court hearing and was coming back, and home was Ironton, and she was fortunate that one of the brothers at her church had sold her this car for $800, and I'm looking it over and I'm thinking, I think I would have gave you the car. So I'm like, and normally in the case when the fuel pump's going out, you can get under there and you beat on the tank a little bit, and while somebody's cranking it, and I've done this before, and it'll start up, But once you turn it off, you're done. But so, I tell her to get in the car, leave the door open. I crawled up underneath the car, and she just filled the tank up, completely full. The tank is so rusted that in the pits of it, there's gasoline dripping off of the bottom of the tank.
Oh, no.
The straps have already rusted off of it. And I pushed on the tank, and it starts swaying under there. Somebody had taken ratchet straps and was holding the tank up underneath the car. And that's when I started praying. I'm like, God, we're either going to have 20 gallons of gas on this concrete and the hazmat's going to show up, or we're going to get this car started. And said a quick prayer. I start beating on the tank, tell her to start it. Cranks right up. And so I crawl out from under it, and I pick up all the tools, and I'm like, ma'am, I said, whatever you do, don't stop anywhere. Don't go past go. You need to go straight home before you turn this car off. And she thanked me and hugged me, and I went and got in a truck. I drove home from there, and I crawled under that car, and I wept like a baby. But there's valleys, but there's mountaintops too.
Yeah. I think that's such an important lesson for all of us to learn, because there's so many times where we feel like we're so busy
Exactly.
and that we don't have time for people. And it's in those moments that we think we're busy, but we're not as much busy as we think we are.
Right.
That we can't take time out to serve or make a difference in somebody's life.
And and that's why that's so important to me. It's like, and I'm not telling you any of this for to take credit for anything that happened or I did anything. It's all God. It's reassurance that He's always there.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And we take that for granted. He is always there, and the Holy Spirit is, and we can't hear the Holy Spirit if we're that wrapped up in the daily routine.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, when God speaks, don't ignore it.
Right.
Don't, you could have just drove off and ignored it, but even kind of like I think about Jonah, he kind of resisted the call to preach to Nineveh, and his attitude wasn't right, but God still used him. And sometimes our attitude isn't always right when we start out, but God wants to just like in Jonah's case, he wanted to remove that anger from Jonah's heart and, the attitude that he had. And I think that's sometimes why God calls us to do things, is because he wants to refine our attitude and help us to have his heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, on the boat, they feared God more than he did. They threw him over.
Yeah.
You know,
and they asked God to, Lord, don't hold this against us.
Right, right. They didn't want any of those repercussions because they knew what was coming.
Yeah, exactly. They
It's,
knew the power of the God that Jonah served.
Yeah.
That was a God getting to know God moment right there for them. Well, let's talk about your salvation for a little bit. When did you accept Christ, and what kind of led up to you accepting Christ? How old were you, and what were the circumstances?
Like I said, we didn't live extravagant lives growing up, but one thing that my parents always made sure of was that we were able to go to church camp every year. And in '78 at camp, St. Francis Asbury, it's a Methodist church camp.
Uh-huh.
I made a profession of faith at 13, but my testimony is real similar to yours. After that, it's the complacency, the compromise. I was rebellious as a teen. I mean, and that's why, I know my grandma's prayers is why I'm sitting here today. I do. I just know. But my teen years went like that, and not until I was a young adult. It was before I had the kids. We were attending a church of the Nazarene in Ashburn, North Carolina, a little small, more of a country church. And
now, did your job take you down to North Carolina? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I mean, that's another whole story in itself. But in 1986, when I graduated, you could not buy a job in this area. I mean, there were no jobs. They may have 6 plant openings, and there would be 6,000 applicants.
Oh, wow.
And so I had like a third or fourth cousin that was working down there. He had graduated from Salem College in West Virginia, and he was working. He didn't even know I was coming. That was another God moment. I took off. He didn't even know I was coming. I was down there, and by the grace of God, I got a hold of him. And I had never been away from home my entire life.
Oh, wow.
And I just got in the car. I told Mom and Dad, I said, I'll be back when I get a job, But I had actually given up because when I got to, I had an old 75 Tornado. It was, like those big Eldorados, had no air. It was probably a 5.5 hour, 6 hour drive to Greensboro. That year they were going through drought. High was shipping hay down there, but I looked on the bank thermometer and it was like 102 degrees, and all I've got left on is a pair of shorts, and I'm soaking sweat. I pull over to the gas station, and I'm thinking, what have I got myself into?
Yeah.
But his mother had gave me his phone number. So that's when they had payphones, I got a payphone.
Yeah, you didn't have your cell phone around.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. I got a payphone. I got a little bit of change in the car, and I called that number. And it was actually some hotel that he had stayed at when he went down there and interviewed.
Oh, wow.
Rather than his residence. So.
And this is happening while you're traveling down there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm in Greensboro, North Carolina. And like I said, never been away from home my entire life. Yeah, some country boy. But so then, you used to be, I'm guessing you still can, but I called information. And had no listing. I seen he was in retail, and I seen a Belk store next to it. So I thought, well, I'll call his work. I called his work, and they're like, well, he went skiing for the weekend. And I'm like, something is not right, you know. So I'm praying to God. I'm like, my efforts are almost exhausted. It's up to you, you know. And I called information again the second time, and I got a number. So I dialed up that number. He answers the phone. I said, Rob, I'm in Greensboro. He's like, no, you're not in Greensboro. And I said, yeah, I really am. He goes, don't mess with me. And I'm like, I know. I said, I'm standing here at this payphone. I'm looking at this store and this store, and I'm on the corner of this and this. And before I know it, he's like, I'll be right there, and hung up the phone.
Didn't tell you if he's
Yeah.
coming or not. He
No,
just like
no, that was another God moment. But yeah, I mean, he's always provided. But um, that's how I ended up in North Carolina. And within a couple of weeks, I had a job, and I got married in October of that year.
So
And
that was the person that they were from North Carolina?
no,
Oh,
no.
okay.
That my first wife was from Marietta,
Oh, okay. Sorry.
and I actually slept on a floor down there for months until we could get stuff moved down. Well, once we got married and got stuff moved down there, and we were living in a little town. It was called Randleman, which is just up the street from Level Cross, where Richard Petty and all the NASCAR stuff is down there.
Uh-huh.
And we were attending the Nazarene Church of Ashburn. It's a small church, but it was pastored by Gary Hedges. And like I said, we hadn't had children yet, and that man had a big impact on my life. He was a man that loved people unconditionally. Was a true example of that, and he served people. And there was a lot of people in the church that had basic needs, and he knew if he was going to fulfill their spiritual needs, he had to do help. And he when he was retiring, he kind of gave us one of those families to adopt, to help out. She was a single mom. She had 4 or 5 kids, and I was trying to keep her car on the road and everything. But, at that point in my life, I realized, I knew all along that I wasn't really living for Christ. I never surrender. You've always got, well, God, you control this and this and this and this. I'll control this. I'm trying to live the American dream. I'm trying.
Yeah. Do what I want.
Yeah, exactly.
You can have this part of my life, God, but not the whole thing.
Right, exactly. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. If I would just give God control, I wouldn't be struggling with all this stuff.
Yeah.
That would be, he sacrificed, his son, and that I don't have to do this. I could be one of his children, And I went to the altar at that church, and I was baptized at that church. Gary baptized me. But that was the point in my life at which I surrendered to God. We're supposed to give up everything and follow Him. And I got to that point in my life where I wanted, I didn't want to give away my eternity for this world.
Yeah.
And you really, through the, there were blessings that come through a lot of those hardships, but you really realize, when your family's gone, and there's these material things that's left laying around and everything, that they don't mean anything.
Yeah.
They really don't.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I could give up everything that I own for one more day with them, I'd do it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So many times we think, sometimes when we have the wrong mindset, we think that stuff matters, but it's the time you spend with people that
it is.
It's the relationships that you have.
It truly is.
Because the stuff,
that's what it is. It's just stuff. And most of the time, all it does is complicate your life. What truly matters is, your relationship with God and the people around you.
Yeah.
Because this is, this is minute compared to eternity. And you really, when you're young, you hear the older folks saying, life's going to go fast. Life's going to go fast, and you don't grasp that.
No.
You don't. But you start getting 50s, 60s, and then it's like, where did last week go?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's gone, and it's.
As a kid, you think you're living forever, and then as you get older, it just goes faster and faster, and you realize how short time really is.
Yeah, and there's certain things that just, like, for instance, when you walk into your 40th high school reunion and there's a wall, that big with pictures on it of people that's already passed, it's a reality.
Yeah. How could you share just a little bit? And everything's been really good, but that you've shared. But I was just wondering, how has this church? I know you've been to several different churches, but how have you felt like Porterfield has the church and been a blessing or a help to you as in your family? Or
I can't express enough how thankful I am for this church. Number one for the kids. I don't know of a church in a 500-mile radius that does what you guys do for the kids. There was one point in my life that I was actually going here for a short period when Mark was pastor.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah. And then I met Mary. I met Mary through Christian Mingle, and she attended Grace Gospel, and I was attending. I had been attending here for maybe 6 months.
Okay.
And I didn't want her to give up,
Sure.
her ministry,
Yeah. Was Bill Angel the pastor there?
That was after Bill.
Oh, okay, so Roger.
Roger
Okay.
was Roger's pastor.
I don't know if you knew this, but me and him grew up together.
Well,
he lived just down the street from my grandma.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. On 11th Avenue in Parkersburg.
So you know him well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say, my entire life, I have been surrounded by people that truly love God, and It's so evident. I mean, and in your sermons, and um, we went through the, and don't get me wrong, I love Pastor Rob Vernon,
Mm-hmm.
and we kind of went through that split, but
And that's hard too. Anytime you go through, because I think we've all had those experiences where church doesn't live up to the church, and
mhm,
that's heartbreaking to see
it is.
friction and just trouble that sometimes we as Christians should be living up to, and we're falling short.
Hmm. And well, one of the reasons that we had ended up there, um, between Mary and I, she had three boys. I have two boys, and Michelle. Michelle hasn't even started having kids yet. And between us, we've been blessed with 15 grandkids. It's like,
Enough to keep you hopping there.
yeah,
Huh?
and
do,
it,
you,
no,
do you got a birthday pretty much every month? Is that
it's
what?
like Christmas every day. And we just put it all on, like Christmas comes around, and we just put it all in the plastic, and then it's like, well, we know where the tax returns are going. And then we started going there, but because we had local grandkids, and we're thinking, well, in order for them to invite their friends to church, we can't be going to the south side of Parkersburg.
Yeah,
That was the biggest factor in the decision. But
sure.
and I feel truly blessed to be here. Even though we had to go through that and some other stuff. I'm so glad we ended up here.
Well, I want to tell you me speaking personally, and I think we as a church feel the same way, that we're glad you're here. You and Mary have been such a blessing to our church, and for her, as far as the deaf community, ALS, being able to be a part of that ministry and seeing her ministry, um, you know. And I want to tell you that as you talked about your dad, I see a lot of those same qualities in you, and I think
I
that's
appreciate it.
very tremendous that you lay your dad laid the foundation, but you're carrying the torch for what he put forth, and I think I could definitely see those qualities in you.
I appreciate that. I do. He really was. He was a good man, and I just pray that uh, there's times where I think I wish I'd have went to the service. I mean, we had the memorial the other day, and
Mm-hmm.
Mary's like, not really, because then I never met you. It's like
Yeah.
God has a plan for
Yes.
everything.
Yeah. Well,
But
and I think that just because and I think part of that is part of like that for me too, because we don't like that service aspect,
mm,
but that's just the nature of who we are. Like we love the opportunity to serve, and but God has used you to serve in so many other ways.
yeah, and it's been helping with Mary's ministry. That's been a real blessing for me. It really
Yeah.
has.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I feel blessed to be here. And, and in a lot of ways, I can relate to you a lot. I mean, and you've said it. I don't know how many times in your sermons and stuff that you feel unworthy. And that there's times when I struggle with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good to be humble, but we also have to accept that if God sees something in us,
Yeah,
we've got to trust Him with it.
we have
Yeah,
to, and you have to demonstrate that. You have to live that trust. It's But I feel truly honored to serve with you guys. I really do.
well, and
I
we're so thankful that you've been willing to step into the deacon role, and it's been awesome to see you get involved in the church, and stuff more. So thank you for serving. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk with us.
No,
Is there anything
I
else that
enjoyed
you would like to share to people to encourage them or just challenge them?
it. It's just, yeah, I've had to go through a lot, and like I said, you can't dwell on that, but you have to see and take notice, that God did have a plan. All the blessings that He's bestowed on you from, certain things that happen. And, um, early on at one point in my life, when stuff like that happens, it's easy to get angry at God. But you have to remember, He loves us,
Yeah,
and He does have a plan.
absolutely. Just like, having you in North Carolina to help the single mom,
Mm-hmm.
or having you at the parts store where you saw the lady who needed help to get to where she was going.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And,
I,
and honestly, I don't want any credit for any of that. I mean,
no, but what's cool is God's used you along the way in stops like that, and
mhm.
that's what we need to be open to for all of us,
Yeah,
to be open to where He nudges us and
yeah. We can't be complacent.
yeah,
I mean, the harvest is there.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank
I
you.
appreciate
I
it.
appreciate your time,
Yeah,
and like I said, I appreciate the love and the acceptance you guys shown to the kids and Mary and I. I really do.
you're
It's
welcome.
it's truly an honor.
Well, we appreciate you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, God bless you.
Bless you.